All right, ladies and gentlemen, always a pleasure and an honor to have our next guest on the show. Uh, Here we have former Division One softball player at New Mexico. After college softball, she went into strength and conditioning at a few different colleges and universities, and then broke into professional baseball in the industry and was the first female hitting coach go into the MLB. If we could go on and on, I'm sure we could do this for 3 or 4 hours, but she's currently working for the New York Yankees. So welcome to the show, Rachel Balkovec.
Thank you very much. And I will be exiting the show now because of that hat you just put on, but no, I'm just kidding. Thank you.
No, I know I had to. I'm from Boston, so I just had to jump at the chance when I saw it. All right. So again, thank you for joining us. Obviously, your resume is pretty long, and you've covered a lot in a short period of time. I was just wondering. I guess obviously you played Division One. You played Division One softball, and then you went into coaching in different fields. So baseball and strength and conditioning. So I'm curious as to what that transition process, essentially going through, I guess, technically leaving your identity as a college athlete and then starting something new. What was your thought process for that? Because personally, I struggled a lot with that. And I've seen, I guess, my college athletes struggle with that as well. I do work in college athletics myself. So I've seen a lot of our student athletes who are 20, 21 years old, and they're starting a new chapter of their life and they don't know exactly what's going on. So I'm curious as to what your process looked like.
I would say that I didn't leave that identity behind. The identity left me behind. And then I had to catch up and go, oh, okay, it's over. And I think that's pretty common. But specifically, mine's pretty different. And by the way, we could talk this whole time about just this topic because I'm really passionate about it, but also because I've done it a lot, but basically I was a hotshot freshman at a Division I level, was slated to start, probably was physically capable of doing that. And more or less in my freshman year, I just had a meltdown and actually developed the yips. So I was a catcher and couldn't throw back to the pitcher. So bad that it was over, some people say, oh, I got the yips and this and that. And then they come back and I never came back. So I was pretty much done. I would say that identity literally left me my freshman year. And then I transferred, I got a little bit better, went to a different Division I and just was never able to compete again at the Division I level. I probably could have gone to a lower level and been fine, but the pressure was too high for me to really recover mentally. And I look back on that experience, and to be honest with you, it was horrible. I probably experienced my first bout of depression at that point in my life, even though I didn't really know what that was. And also, there weren't mental skills coaches to help me through that at that point. It was a very novice field at the time where mental performance wasn't a huge conversation like it is now. So my coaches didn't know what to do with me, which fair enough. Nobody knew what to do with me. And a lot of times, still today, a lot of people don't know how to handle the yips. So my career ended before it got started, really, and I kind of struggled through the next 2 years and didn't end up playing my senior year. So it was a pretty rough go. And so I got I didn't leave that identity. The identity was hey, I'm out. And then I finally figured out that was okay. And I think a lot of athletes go through that process, whether that's a high school athlete, could be a college athlete, all the way up to the Olympics, where they talk about the post-Olympic depression, and how that identity of being an Olympian and that extreme high just ends and you lose that identity. So I think it's super common, and I didn't handle it very well at the time. But now, as a result of that, I feel like now, and I can prove it based off of just my journey since then, I look at my identity now knowing that it's going to be gone. So when it does happen, I'm not surprised by it, and I handle it a lot better and just go, okay, what's next? What's my next thing? So changing your identity and letting go of your identity is something I talk passionately about, whether that's in the sports world, career world, or even just personal relationships. A bad boyfriend, I might be talking to my friend about hey, it's okay. You have your identity wrapped into this relationship and you're gonna have to let go of that. So I think basically expecting change and expecting identity loss is something that I think a lot of people could benefit from, because then when it happens, it's not as jarring.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good perspective. Instead of, so essentially just being ready for that kind of change. I guess that sort of leads into, obviously, when you were done with college athletics, you weren't competing anymore, and then you moved into the next step. What are the conversations like in your mind when you decide, hey, all right, it's time, I'm going into strength and conditioning, and also when you went into baseball? I guess, what was the conversation within your mind with yourself? I mean, what was it? You had like 12 internships or something. But what was the thought process of making that jump?
Okay, so getting into strength and conditioning was actually pretty natural, because I had failed on the field so much, and I loved the weight room, and so it was really, I liked it and I was interested in it, and also it was my way to contribute, or just be like a, have some kind of self-worth on a team where we could go in there and I was more or less like a leader in the weight room, and that was my sense of confidence, honestly, throughout my career. And so it was kind of a natural transition to strength and conditioning. And then baseball, and the struggle with that was, it wasn't 12 internships, I did 7 before getting hired full-time into baseball. But the transition to baseball was really about, I had actually at New Mexico come across, a lot of my friends were baseball players, and they were getting drafted into the minor league systems for a lot of these organizations. And I, like many people, even casual fans, did not understand the length and the extensive nature of professional baseball in the minor league system. So I actually became really fascinated with the business of professional baseball, and really the development system of professional baseball. And that's why I was like, whoa, that's something I really want to be a part of. And on top of that, I was listening to them talk about how they're eating hot dogs before the games and training in the YMCA in the random town they were in. And I was like, what in the world is going on over there? I was just shocked by learning about the minor league system. And so that's why I wanted to get into professional baseball, was actually to change it. And so I kind of went in with a mindset, I want to improve this. I'd been at LSU for 2 years, and I was like, at the pinnacle of sports and facilities at LSU and the SEC. And then I was hearing about these guys who were professional athletes being exposed to these less than ideal training situations. So that was the origin of me wanting to be in professional baseball. And then from there, yeah, the conversations with myself during that time, really, where I was, I didn't know for a while that I was being discriminated against. And then I found out that I was being discriminated against, and was told that very blatantly by a couple of teams. And really, that journey was like, at some point, it was just my interest. I wanted to get into baseball, and I truly just wanted to work in baseball. It's that simple, just like any other strength coach, male or female. And then at some point it was like, no, I have to do this, because if my resume was 7 internships, 6 of which were baseball related at high levels of the game, and I'm a woman and I can't get into the game. And by the way, I spoke Spanish, I had this great resume. And I started to think to myself, if I can't get in the game as a woman, what other woman has this resume? No one, not even a man had that resume at the time for a young strength coach who was getting in the game. So I just started to think, this is like, I have to do this, because I don't know the next woman who's going to come along and be able to break in. So that was kind of my thought process during that whole period of time, where I was kind of floating around until I was 26, 27. My parents were starting to wonder if I was crazy. I had a master's degree and was waitressing, so it was pretty bleak at times, but I just started to think, like, just like the shirt you're wearing, it's my purpose. I have to do this.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've covered a lot of ground since. So I just wanted to touch briefly on the discrimination part of things. I think we all have some sort of experience with discrimination in one shape or form, or one way or another. So for me, I work with deaf and hard of hearing athletes. There, of course, is some discrimination, some form of discrimination in that field, whether it be gender, race, everything with that. So with the current social climate, obviously that's sort of a hot button, obviously. So I guess, what If, for example, if you were working with somebody who felt like they were being discriminated against, what advice would you give that person? Maybe some like action steps that you would encourage them to take. Instead of saying like, hey, don't let them get to you, that kind of thing. I mean, of course you can talk about it, but what are some of the tangible things that you would encourage them to do, especially in athletics?
Yeah, I have deliberately chosen a really different perspective on this because I just don't ever want to look at myself like I'm a victim. And even if I am a victim, because technically I can tell you I have been a victim of these things, if that, because that's the common phrasing that we all use, you know. I just choose, like, I am not a victim. This is my purpose on this planet, which means I love it when somebody doubts me or tries to demean me, because nobody can demean me if I don't let them. And so I love it when I get in those situations. I look at that as like, this is my purpose on the planet, to change people's minds. So when somebody says, oh, you can't do this because you're a woman, or they rarely say that to my face now. It's all kind of like these small little comments, or the way that they look, or the way that they treat me, or the way that I'm left out of something. And I just go, oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to change your mind. Thank you for this opportunity that I get to build myself up to be so indestructible in this industry that my resume is head and shoulders above literally everyone. You know, and it's just like I tell people, and I don't mean to be insensitive to other people's experiences, but I will say I'm glad that I was discriminated against. You know why? Because then I got 7 internships on my resume all over the world, not all over the country, but all over the world, internationally. And now I still am reaping the benefits from being held back. I'm still reaping the benefits from having to work harder than other people. And it's not the actual experiences, it's just the feeling of having to outwork somebody, and knowing that you have built confidence on the fact that you have outworked other people to get where you're at. So I don't look at it as a disadvantage. I try to take a perspective of, I don't do anything about it. I don't go to HR, I don't go to my manager. I go, oh, okay, thank you so much for discriminating against me. I'll be back, you know, and you'll hire me, or I'll be your boss. And that's the only way that I want to deal with it. I don't want to tell anyone, well, first you need to sit down with them and you need to explain to them why they should respect you. Good luck with that. That ain't never going to work. The way that you really, and this is a long-term solution. People want the short-term thing. They want the answer that's like, well, first you approach them and you have a sit-down conversation. If that conversation doesn't work, you go to HR and you get them to if you want long-term change, you will take your time to earn that person's respect, no matter how bad they want to hate you, no matter how bad they want to hold you down. You take your time and you continue to work. And over time, if you stick it out, they can't deny you. You become undeniable as a person, as a colleague, as a teammate, whatever it is. So that's my perspective. I know it's unique. I know that the 1, 2, 3 step answer is probably more popular and easier, but I choose to not be a victim. I never want to think of myself as a victim, because the second you start to even let that thought creep into your mind that you're a victim, you have given away your power. You're the helpless person that has no power to change things. But I'm not a victim, so I have power to change things. So I'm the most powerful person in the room. So that's my suggestion to anyone who's experienced discrimination.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote that I actually just saw recently. It was from Chris Bumstead, as a bodybuilder, and he was talking about pressure is a privilege. So really just using that to grow from it. And speaking of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
I was watching one of your interviews recently, and you were talking about, there was a phrase, it's tensional growth, something where you try to encourage either yourself or other athletes to do something that actually scares them, you know? So for example, I'm an athlete, there's something that scares me, but you're trying to get me to go for it anyway. And I think that applies quite a bit. I think that really struck me. But as an athlete and as a coach, how would you, I guess, introduce yourself to that tensional growth, or how would you expose people to that for in whatever possible field, whether it be something physically or something mentally?
I think that I believe, unless you're in true denial, I believe that most people know in their life what they're avoiding. So that could be hard exercise, that could be nutrition, that could be they see someone doing something that they don't know how to do and they want to do it, but they don't want to ask because they don't want to seem dumb. You know, like all these fears that we have, and or you just have a desire, not even fear, but you have a desire. You're like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that. You keep making excuses why you can't do it. And a lot of times it's knowledge, it's your circle that you're in, whatever, it's time, whatever, you're not making time for it. And I think that how would you expose people to that? It's literally like clear the time and make the time to do something different. And again, it's not what you do. It literally could be anything. I mean, I've in my time learned how to play beach volleyball. I've picked up, I don't want to say bow hunting, but I'm shooting a bow. I've learned how to shoot a gun. I just believe that even when I'm 60, I'm still going to be picking up new things. The fastest way to have intentional growth is to pick up something new to learn. And that could be literally anything, anything. Because most people past the age of 30 stop learning new things, truly new things. Sure, they might read a different book or whatever, but like a truly new skill that is going to stretch them physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever that might be, a truly new skill to pick that up after age 30 is pretty rare. So literally just doing anything different than you've done is important. The question was, how would I, help an athlete do that? It's like that takes, especially when there's like money on the line and they are changing mechanics or they're just doing something different in their training. And it's scary because they're like, I don't want to change something because I'm having success, or I've had this level of success and I don't want to change it, because what if I change it and then on the other side, I'm not better? So I think approaching an athlete with objective information about how that's going to help them is important. And then it all, of course, stems from developing a relationship with them. So, and I've been guilty of, I think all coaches have been guilty of, not establishing a relationship well enough, or you think you've established a relationship, but not well enough to push somebody over the edge to try something new or different. So establishing the relationship first and then asking them to make that change and really, do the scary growth thing, whatever that might be, is probably the best order. Although, like I said, I think every teacher, coach, parent has been guilty maybe of not understanding how emotionally stressful that is for a young person, or just a person who's, that you're an authority figure for. It's stressful to try something new and fail in front of somebody who's evaluating you.
Yeah, I mean, that really speaks volumes to how one person's environment can really affect you, whether that be for the better or for worse. Some environments obviously are more conducive for growth, and being more positive, and also just impacting mindsets. For example, in another interview I did with J.M. Blakely, he's a world champion powerlifter. But I spoke to him about one thing. He said that he writes different goals on his arms, and he writes down a number that he wants to lift, and he'll really focus on that. And it's in that kind of thing. So for myself, when I was in college, I really wanted to get all conference. So I printed out different pictures of people on the other teams and some of the players on those teams. And after I played them, I would cross off those pictures, almost like a hit list kind of thing. So I was really trying to control my environment to motivate myself. And I guess, what are some of the things that you might encourage your athletes to do? And whether that can be something like a holistic approach, but I'm more so curious what your checklist looks like every time you meet a student or an athlete, or whoever that is, how you get them to control their environment a little bit better.
So I'll answer the athlete question, which is just, I think this is a pretty common conversation now, is like, we are dead focused on the process. So we're not worried about like the big, huge goal of getting to the big leagues and winning a World Series with these minor league players. We're worried about just key objectives. We have, in particular with the Yankees offense, we have 4 objectives that they can focus on. We don't have 50 different things, because if they're trying to focus on 50 things, nothing gets done. So we have 4 objectives, and for each player, they might only have 2 objectives that they're working on. So they have 2 things. So every day when they come into the cages, it's the checklist is very simple and straightforward. What are you doing today to get better? These are the 2 things you need to focus on. Underneath of those 2 things, what are you doing to actually get better in that category? So it's really a very general concept of just, okay, like you just said you wanted to be conference player of the year, whatever. So you had a list, each team, you didn't just put that goal there and then have nothing to get there. You basically had pictures of each team. I love that you said that little hit list of players, like, okay, check, done, check, done. Okay, that's done. So it's really breaking it down and focusing on the process one step at a time. And I think, again, it's a very common conversation. It's not just really coaching folklore. That's behavioral science, right? So you want to break things down into digestible steps to change behavior and to evolve and to get there. So it's really just being process focused and giving them, I would say, objective feedback to let them know where they're at every day. So obviously data has influenced every aspect of not only baseball, but all professional sports at this point. And we are adamant about they need to know where they're at every single day and get immediate, if possible, immediate objective feedback to let them know, okay, today, did you do your job or did you not do your job? You know, in these 2 tiny areas that you need to focus on. So just being laser focused on the daily steps that are going to get you to those big goals.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I agree. Data has definitely changed the game everywhere. But that's, I guess, one of my personal questions that I've had for a lot of coaches who are very focused on statistics and numbers and analysis. I have a feeling that, of course, that they're covering a lot, but maybe not necessarily everything. So, for example, my baseball team in college, we didn't have any budget. And we didn't have, I mean, we barely had a weight room. We barely had, we barely had anything. So we didn't have any kind of like sabermetrics. We just didn't have the technology. And at that time, Driveline wasn't popular. That was before Driveline was really a thing. So our team had a lot of success, and I felt like we had essentially just the right attitude. We had a competitive environment. And now, after I left, they've gotten everything. They've gotten all the technology, but it seems like they can't quite win yet. So I'm curious, yes, of course, there is a place and time for data, but I guess how often would you really emphasize the intangibles part? Like the competitiveness, the attitude, that kind of thing.
I mean, to be honest with you, I think that's always number one. But in a world where, I mean, what you just said, okay, it was before Driveline, so we're talking about 10 years ago. I don't know what years you played. 10 years ago, we didn't have a video camera on an iPhone. You know, 5 years ago, I remember 2016 when I was with the Astros, the Edgertronic camera was like, we had to keep it a secret because Edgertronic camera was brand new, you know, technology. And now it's like every single team has Edgertronic cameras, you know, and a lot of colleges now have private facilities have Edgertronic cameras. It's everywhere. So it's like the competitive edge moves. So whatever you had back then, yeah, there wasn't technology back then. So whatever you had talent wise, and then obviously fuel to the fire is like the attitude and the intangibles. That's what everyone had. So, but now, even if you work hard, you know, if you don't have objective feedback guiding you, then you still are probably at a disadvantage to some teams that can see. So it's, for me personally, and this is a whole nother podcast, I guess, but it's like, I think the intangibles are everything. But when I say everything, it's like assuming that you have the baseline resources that other teams have and you're using that. Then once that's a level playing field, then Yeah, the team that has the best chemistry, the best work ethic, the best perseverance, grit. Yeah, that team is gonna win if they're already at the base level of resources. But if they're not getting direct feedback, it'd be pretty hard for you to win in today's game if you're not having any kind of feedback and you're just working, I would say, blindly.
Right. I wanted to follow up to that. I know that you have talked about specific tasks and different objectives, having 4 or 2 very specific objectives, and you have the baseline intangibles. But as a coach, obviously, we want our athletes to compete. So for me personally, I've always found it interesting. And sometimes I do have a challenging time really trying to get the athletes to compete. For example, we have athletes like Michael Jordan, right? For example, Michael Jordan will compete in everything, whether it be basketball, golf, gambling, whatever he's doing. And if you have other athletes who are really competitive in specific things, like Kobe, for example, is all about basketball, and everything else, don't get me wrong, if he loses the game, it's fine, it's whatever. But if it's basketball, that's where things are a little bit different. So I guess, how do you facilitate that? Whether that be in practice or in the cages? And I know that you have data, of course, but how do you get their mind to really get in the game? And of course, money is a big
factor. Money is a big, what was that last part?
Obviously people are driven by money as well. So if you have a big contract or something like that, that puts more pressure to perform. But in general, I guess my question is just in general, how do you draw both of those things?
But interesting that you say that, because I really don't think that the big money guys work harder than the zero money guys. Like, I honestly think that once they get over like the kind of hump of like the shock of getting a bunch of money, they become who they were before. You know, maybe they feel that pressure at the beginning, but then like that doesn't motivate them at the end of the day, unless money. Interesting you brought that up, but I'll get to it. So I would say, in a very short way, the competitive cauldron is the term that I use for it. I got that term from Anson Dorrance, who's the UNC women's soccer coach. He's won, I think, 30 national championships at this point. And then he got that from Dean Smith, who is the famous UNC basketball coach, men's basketball coach. So the competitive cauldron is where basically you are keeping score on everything that you do in practice. And so for him, it's actually like he has team managers. By the way, I just visited North Carolina and saw this in person. They have like 8 team managers at every practice that are tallying up things that happen in practice. Then these tally points are added together and they all go on this board, I think, by the next day. So girls can go and check the board at their soccer complex and see how they performed in practice yesterday relative to their peers. So they get points individually, but they also are working in teams within their team. So he calls them small societies. So they're getting points from what their team did, but they're also getting points individually. So they're constantly competing. They can't help but compete because they see their name on the board, and it sucks to be at the bottom of the board. So that's the competitive cauldron that he implements in every single practice, all year round, all the time. So then we have for us, like, that's just managers tallying down things, which in soccer it's like a little harder, right? But for us, we have like exit velocities, launch angle, we've got attack angle with blast, we've got many different metrics that are very concrete metrics that we have every single day. So the competitive cauldron becomes, how do you get these guys to compete? Well, it's very simple. This is a very, very simple system. It's so simple. Implementing it is not as easy, but it's very simple. You take the team that you have, you put them into small groups that are called small societies. They compete against each other in these groups. They also compete individually for points, and then you give them rewards. It sounds so simple, right? That's how you get people to compete. I would swear by that up and down. I've done it in several settings with different age groups, with different things, with different prizes. Money does work for those prizes, not money individually, but money for the prizes for winning something. And I think it's magnified when you do it in teams. So to give people prizes as a team when they're working together to compete, to do something difficult and beat another team within, again, this is within the team, the small societies. It's honestly, it's like magic. It works like a charm every time. I've done prizes that are cool socks, and I've done prizes that are cash prizes, and I've done prizes that are like events. So we go to the beach for a day, or we go to a resort for a day or whatever, and they get a special treat of like an event together. But yeah, rewarding people for competing and showing, giving them the feedback to show them where are you at every day. So someone could have a good practice and the coach gives them a pat on the back and says, hey, good practice. Or you can objectively measure what they did in practice and then pair them, pair them against their teammates the next day on the board. And that's like, oh, okay, I did have a good practice, because sometimes it goes both ways with athletes, right? A coach could pat somebody on the back and say, hey, great practice, and they don't believe it. Some athletes will go, oh yeah, thanks coach, whatever, and then there's the other athlete that the coach says, hey, you're the worst player on the team, and they don't believe it, right? And they're like, no, coach, I'm the best player on the team. So being able to present that objective feedback every day and show like, hey, no, you are the worst player on the team. You're at the bottom of the thing every single day. Or no, hey, you did have a great practice. Look, you're at the top here. You beat all your teammates. You had a great practice. So it's really just taking the emotion out of evaluation and getting them to compete, and then visually being able to see, okay, where did I fall compared to my teammates? That was kind of a long answer, but competitive cauldron, in short. I would Google that with Anson Dorrance and you'll find a lot of information.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's definitely a cool concept. And I've started to see more and more schools doing that, including ourselves as well. One thing that I've noticed, I guess, what do you want to call it? The old school phrase, something that I've started seeing. I've seen it thrown around sometimes. It's like some players will get the reputation of, hey, he's a good practice player, or he's a good game player. You know what I mean? Like, it's players who actually just play well during practice, but when it comes to game time, when the bright lights are on, it's showtime, it's hit or miss, they're nowhere to be found. And then you have other people who they're okay in practice, but when it comes to game time, they're on every time. So I'm curious, I guess, from your perspective, how would you mitigate that kind of, I guess, perception? Or would you stick with that cauldron?
Definitely the people who just turn on for games. Like I don't really buy into that. I think that's probably the player probably feels like they don't need to practice hard, which I would stick with the cauldron 100%, because you cannot be, you aren't missed, right? Like your teammates can see whether or not you're working hard, especially when you're competing as a team in those small societies. They're like, hey, this is for points. This means something. Practice means something. So bringing meaning to practice, I think, takes care of like the gamers, but the people who perform in practice and then can't perform in a game, I think that's actually a different subject. That becomes the mental skills aspect, where they have performance anxiety, which again, going back to the first question, like that's basically what I had. That's what the yips is, right? You have performance anxiety, which turns into such a high level of anxiety that you actually can't perform the tasks that you're supposed to do in the game, which we see this in all sports. Basketball, people lose their shot. Golf, people are shanking the ball all the time. So this happens in every sport. I think that's a different topic that is really, it might be exacerbated by the competitive cauldron, where there's pressure in practice. So I think that's a much more delicate subject than the other way around, where players aren't taking practice seriously and then they just turn it on for the game.
Yeah, obviously you could go forever on this topic, but I do want to be mindful of your time. One last question for you. I guess this leads to our wrap up, but obviously you're a coach. You're also an athlete, still an athlete. You also do, it also has a lot to do with mentoring. So I'm sure that there are some similarities and some differences in coaching and mentoring. So I guess where do you draw the line for coaching and mentoring, especially as somebody who's working with younger athletes?
When you mean, when you say, where do you draw the line? What do you mean by that?
I mean, sometimes like you have to coach them and sometimes you have to mentor them. So I guess just, I feel like that line gets blurry sometimes. And I'm curious as to how you keep, I mean, do you keep those things together or do you keep them separate?
I think it's all the same. I don't think that my job is to, well, technically my job is to get them to hit the ball harder and further and be more successful on the field. But my actual job, like as a human being, is to make sure that they're developing as a person. So whether that's because I'm actually like sitting down and having a personable talk with them, or we're using baseball as the vehicle to challenge their mindsets, to have them learn about failure, to have them learn about working together as a team. But I do think you have to be intentional about saying those things and calling out like, hey, this isn't about baseball. This is about who are you as a human being? And then how does that show up through the things that you do with baseball? Is it just about getting to the big leagues and making a bunch of money? Or is it about getting to the big leagues, making a bunch of money, and then using your platform that you have as a professional athlete to do good in the world? Like what is this all about for you? So I think for me, it's a very blurred line. I don't think there's any difference between mentoring and coaching, although I think that we can get easily lost by, well, this player's not performing on the field, and we talk all about baseball, 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 and it's like, okay, well, what is this actually about? And for me, it's about making sure that we're developing the human being.
Yeah, that was great. Definitely a good topic to wrap up on. So now, where can viewers find you? If they wanted to learn more about you or maybe work with you, where can we find you?
I usually say if you can spell my name, you can find me anywhere. So it's just rachelbalkovec.com or at rachel.balkovec on Instagram, or maybe I think the same thing on TikTok, _ Rachel Balkovec on Twitter. If you can spell my name, you can find me anywhere. You can learn about my mentorship on my website. There's a tab for mentorship. I'm just wrapping up my mentorship, which I do only once a year, but I have the application open all year long where people can fill it out for the next off season, basically, is what it comes down to, and is when I have time to do those things. So rachelbalkovec.com/mentorship, and you'll be able to apply to work with me in the off season.
Awesome. What does Rachel Balkovec have in store for 2022?
Being the best hitting coach I can be for the New York Yankees organization is really the first priority. I feel like I'm in such a great spot with the Yankees where I feel dumb, like it's always feel good to feel like you're the least smartest person in the room. So I'm definitely learning a ton, not only from the hitting department, but really all departments. I think we're firing on all cylinders, and it's showing in the way that the minor league system performed last year. And so just being able to contribute to that organization is really number one on my list.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate you joining us today. Good luck with your off season, and hopefully whenever you travel safe. And do you have, I believe you have more travel points than the Travelocity gnome, so.
I hope so. That's a great goal. Thank you.
Hey, anytime. So thank you again, and we'll wrap up the recording.